You step out from your underground home. The sun is bright, the trees are tall, the fertile lands around you are ablaze with life. Dangerous life. More dangerous now than ever before. You are of the Vanguard, an elite force of explorers and get-it-doners of the small folk. So, who are the small folk? Why must you, the player, leave the relative safety of the underground tunnels the small folk typically dwell within? Why are the creatures outside becoming more aggressive? If this is Earth, as we know it, where are all of the humans? Smalland is quite new as of the making of this video, having only begun its early access March 29th of 2023, but let's do our best to answer as many questions as we can as we explore the story of Smalland. As soon as you start a new game, we're given this brief synopsis of our mission. Intrepid vanguards, your queen is ill, gravely ill. This is why, as your king, I am asking for your help. Venture into the overland and seek out a cure, whatever the cost. Be bold, be brave, remain vigilant. From King Valdemar's speech to the Vanguard Corps. Quite immediately, we're made aware of who we are and why we must set out and explore the dangerous world around us. Shortly after exiting our underground home, known as the Burrows, we'll learn more about the dangerous overland as well as our mission from an elder of our people, Elder Ludwig. From him, we learn that nearby is a walnut chest which contains the elixir of life, Melkar the Apothecary's greatest achievement. Presumably, this elixir could save the queen's life, but the key to open the chest, known as the Clover Key, has vanished. The key was kept in the royal vault, which was under constant heavy guard. Only Ludwig and the king were allowed entry. Curiously, Ludwig refers to Melkar the Apothecary in the past tense. He was the royal family's personal apothecary. Where we stand now was his overland laboratory. Did Melkar take the key? Does he have something to do with the abrupt agitation of the wildlife outside? Perhaps, though he was known to strike out into the overland for days in search of rare ingredients to use in his potions, and Ludwig admits that the key could have vanished some time ago, as they didn't check for it until the queen became ill. Well, our conversation with Ludwig certainly has been enlightening. When asked if the unusual agitation and aggressiveness of the creatures in the area might have something to do with the Clover Key, he claims it to be an interesting coincidence, but we have no evidence to suggest that there is a connection, well, aside from the stark coincidence. Ludwig will direct us to one last helpful individual before we begin our mission proper, but Hearn will mostly be teaching us game mechanics. Spoiler, it's a survival crafting game and you'll need to craft stuff to survive. So now we have an idea of who we are and what we need to do, so let's talk about where we are. The Overland. Shortly after leaving the safety of the Burrows, no matter which direction you go, we'll begin to come across the remnants and ruins of the giants, humans. Benches, boats, tables and grills, screws and bottle caps and keys, and so much more. Eventually, we'll even stumble upon human remains, monolithic and seemingly ancient skeletal remains of the giants that once roamed these lands that seem to have disappeared. Whether they've gone extinct or simply moved on, we're not yet sure. More on that later. The Overland seems to be a broad term to describe the lands above ground. To the small folk, a seemingly endless expanse of wild and untamed nature. From the perspective of most humans, though, it seems we may find ourselves in a backyard? Maybe a forest park of some kind. To the small folk, the land is crossed and patched with all manner of streams and ponds that make travel rather difficult, given our inability to swim. To the giants, these would be mere trickles and puddles. But we'll navigate those trickles and puddles and the monstrous trees and bramble before us to find several other small folk who seem to have established themselves in the Overland well before us. First, we find Kalev, just west of where we started, who once managed a mining operation. Unfortunately, this operation recently went awry and small folk lives were lost. Kalev will direct us to Skadi, established near the beach to the south, who will tell us of a great and angry beetle that needs to be dealt with. Once we've established a base and prepared ourselves thoroughly, sharpening our teeth on less terrifying but equally angry creatures of the forest, we take on the rhino beetle and bring its horn back to Skadi. Skadi recognizes that the rhino beetle once dwelled in the swamps to the northwest, and urges us to visit Lysandra, an expert on the creatures of the swamps. Lysandra, as it turns out, has been preoccupied with a similar issue. She recently saw somebody lurking around the swamp, and shortly after, a giant albino spider emerged from beyond the western walls of the swamps to make its nest in a cave southwest of her. If we bring her one of its eyes, she may be able to tell us more. So we venture southwest and brave the horrors of many spiders, eventually finding the next beast in question. The albino spider proves a horrifying, nasty, gross, awful, terrible foe, but vanquishing it and returning to Lysandra with one of its eyes, we learn that it had in fact been poisoned. This is deeply unsettling, as Lysandra is unaware of any poison that could affect such a large creature. Lysandra recommends we seek out Tuhala, who taught her everything she knows. But Tuhala has gone missing after some kind of accident, so we are to seek out Nock, who resides in the Greylands where a black hornet has taken over. Have you spotted the trend yet? Because I haven't. I have no idea where this is going. What a bunch of crazy coincidences. Anyway, after helping Nock with her hornet problem, learning the whereabouts of Tuhala, and speaking with her, and dealing with a spider matriarch for the grouchy swamp lady, she'll teach us how to create armor with healing properties. Now we're ready for our final battle. Exploring the overland further, we'll eventually come upon the last creature we are to slay, the king stag beetle in the ruins to the southeast. It will prove a worthy opponent, but once we've slain it, we'll finally have found what we've been looking for, the clover key, the key to unlock the walnut chest which contains the elixir that will save our queen's life. We return to Elder Ludwig and tell him we found the key chained to the king stag beetle in the ruins. Though Ludwig is very intrigued by this series of events and insists we need to get to the bottom of this story, first, we must open the chest and retrieve the elixir. Rushing to the chest, we insert the clover key. The chest opens with a deep rattle, and inside, not the elixir, but a scroll. Quickly bringing the scroll to Ludwig, he'll explain it is written in the old tongue, and he cannot read it. But Teodric, the historian, should be able to decipher it. He tells us we can find Teodric in the giant's ancient sanctuary in the ruins in the southwest. But this is where the story ends for now. As of the making of this video, that part of the story isn't available to us yet. We'll have to wait for Teodric to receive word of what we've found. And that is the story of Smalland thus far, and there are still many questions left to be answered. What happened to the giants? Who stole the elixir, and what does the scroll they left behind say? Why are the creatures of the overland being poisoned and driven to hostility? Before this video ends, I'll propose a few theories, but for the time being, that's all they are. Personally, it seems to me the giants, or humans, have simply abandoned this area. Given the presence of human skeletal remains, it's entirely possible that Smalland is attempting to convey the idea of human extinction, a time long after we are gone when the creatures of the earth are beginning to reclaim the land we once chiseled to our liking. But there simply isn't enough evidence of that being the case. At least not yet. Given the few human objects and constructions we can find, though they are in disrepair, it's entirely possible we find ourselves in the large coastal backyard of a family that simply doesn't venture out here anymore. We also don't yet know the lifespan of small folk. Though they speak of giants as though they've been gone for generations, that could be a few years, or a few decades, or a few centuries. We simply don't know yet. As for the story of the main questline thus far, it seems relatively clear that Melkar, the former apothecary of the royal family, is behind the disturbing behavior of the overland creatures we face. An apothecary, in the context of Smalland, is someone who concocts potions and poisons and elixirs and remedies. An alchemist, to an extent. Theoretically, as we've discovered that at least one of the overland creatures we faced was poisoned and then became hostile, Melkar may have been capable of producing that poison that befuddled Lysandra, and he may have been the small folk she saw lurking about the swamp beforehand. At that rate, it also seems rather likely that Melkar himself is the culprit behind the Queen's sudden illness. That, his disappearance, the theft of the clover key, and the rage of the overland creatures seem to have all happened a bit too quickly for this all to be a coincidence. So, he poisoned his queen, stole the only antidote, and struck out into the overland, which he is very familiar with, to cause as much trouble for those who may suspect him as possible, leaving a trail of terrifying death behind him. The only question remaining then, if we are to take this as true, is why? What caused him to betray the royal family and his people? What's Melkar's motive? We may also have some hints that Elder Ludwig himself is in on this. He quite clearly stated that only he and the king had access to where the Clover Key was kept, so if it wasn't the king, well, Ludwig could have removed it and given it to Melkar. Also, despite being an elder, he claims to not be able to speak the Old Tongue. Granted, we don't really know just how old the Old Tongue is. It seems Ludwig is hiding something. It's also just a bit convenient how skeptical he is of a connection despite all of these events taking place so rapidly. We can clearly see the connection ourselves, but he doesn't seem so keen on it. It's all rather suspicious. Is Ludwig working with Melkar? Is this some kind of coup? That, it seems, is something we'll have to find out in the future when Smalland receives its next big update. So until then, and until next time, thanks for watching.